Hello. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. And what I thought I would do is spend maybe 12-15 minutes reading 3 short selections from the book, and then answer any questions anybody might have about the story, the process, life, the universe, how to deal with the Jack Russell Terrier. I don't have those answers. The life in the universe would be much easier. Anyway. So I thought I would start with a brief scene from the beginning of the novel. For those of you who are starting it, and for those who haven't read it yet, I promise I won't be really doing any major spoilers here, because I hate spoilers. Chapter 1. Lydia glanced at her phone and jumped down from the edge of the sink in the girls' bathroom. 10 more minutes before the late bus. She could risk leaving now. Cracking open the door, she looked up and down the hallway for any sign of Clive. So far, so good. She'd kept her backpack and jacket with her all day, so all she had to do was escape outside without being seen. Then she'd have the whole weekend without him following her around. The way he seemed to know where she'd be at any given time was more than a little creepy. It wasn't right. He wasn't right. Lydia couldn't figure out what Clive wanted, but whenever he looked at her, she felt unsteady, like the ground was tilting under her feet. For once, she'd timed it perfectly. The halls were empty. Shouldering her pack, Lydia sprinted down the stairs to the side exit, where she could see the bus loading zone and had a clear view of anyone coming in or out of the building. A few other students and several of her teachers passed by as if she were invisible. If only she were invisible, then Clive wouldn't be her problem. She waited until everyone else boarded before jogging across the field to the bus. There were a few other kids she knew, but no one spoke to her. It had been a long week, and Lydia didn't want to talk to anyone either. As they pulled away from school, she let her breath out in a long sigh, shoved her backpack under an empty seat, and slumped against the window. With Monday off, she had 3 days to work on her college essays and get her history paper finished. 3 whole days without having to dodge her personal stalker. Thank God it's Friday had never seemed more appropriate. "May I?" a deep voice asked, full of exaggerated politeness. She jerked her head up, heart pounding. It couldn't be. Clive was standing, leaning over her seat, staring at her with his odd emerald eyes. He shouldn't even be here. As far as she knew, he didn't live anywhere near her side of town. As usual, no one even glanced her way. If Clive tried to touch her, she wondered if anyone would react if she screamed. If Clive tried to touch her, she sure as hell would. He sat down beside her and she inched closer to the window. "It's the glamour," he said. All that effort avoiding him for nothing. How did he even get on the bus? Lydia was sure he hadn't boarded before her, and she was the last one on. Maybe he would just go away as she closed her eyes. That's why they don't really notice you. Lydia could hear the perfect smile in his voice. Ever since he came to school in September, most of the girls and even some of the guys practically drooled over him. But no one else seemed to catch the odd things he said to her. Not the kids who orbited around Planet Clive, not the teachers who somehow never called on him or collected his homework, not the guidance counselor who didn't seem to register her complaints about him. No one. "But it's thinning," he said. At least her stop was next. Then she could go home and pretend there wasn't anyone named Clive Barrow following her around at school. And in 7 months, she would graduate, then head off to college. With any luck, she would never, ever see him again. Once it's gone altogether, you won't be safe here anymore. Even Oberon couldn't keep you hidden forever. She opened her eyes. He was staring at her, smiling. Oberon, Shakespeare, he was talking nonsense again. and she was pretty sure he was mocking her, too. They just finished reading A Midsummer Night's Dream in English class. "Taking the in-character exercise pretty seriously, aren't you?" Lydia said, irritation making her sarcastic. "Where do you think he stole his ideas from?" "Who?" she said, before pressing her lips closed. She shouldn't have opened her mouth. The last thing she wanted was to encourage him. In a few minutes, she would be home. Surely he wouldn't follow her there. "Shakespeare." Clive shook his head, his straight black hair falling to frame his oval face. "Never mind." "What's wrong with you? Just leave me alone," she said, tugging her backpack free from under the seat in front of her. The bus groaned as it turned the corner of her street. Lydia glanced at Clive, but he didn't budge, effectively trapping her there. "Excuse me," she said, not even trying to mirror his formal tone. Her mom's Subaru was parked in the driveway. Good. She stood up and shouldered her bag, cursing as the bus accelerated past her house. Freaking driver wasn't going to stop again. "Hey, that's my stop," she called. He slammed on the brakes and the bus squealed to a halt. The door hissed open. Clive stood up and swept his arm in a bow that should have seemed weird and awkward in the confined space of the bus, but somehow didn't. "After you," he said. Lydia pushed past him in the aisle, trying not to think of what she'd do if he followed her. Yell? Call the police? Run? She smiled. There weren't a lot of kids who could outpace her when she poured it on. "Whatever," she said. As she turned toward the front of the bus, a shadow fell over it, darkening the afternoon to instant dusk. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "Thorn, pierce it," Clive said, his voice a low growl. She glanced back at him, not sure why the strange things he said bothered her, why she couldn't just ignore him. Something had ruffled his perfect composure. Lydia followed the line of his gaze to her house. Her brother Marco's bike was leaning on the railing of the front porch, his muddy soccer cleats draped over the handlebars as usual. One of her neighbors was walking a yapping corgi. The sky that had been threatening rain all day let loose with a spray of droplets. It was all utterly ordinary. So why was her pulse pounding in time to the beat of the rain on the roof of the bus? The door closed. They lurched forward. "You idiot, you made me miss my stop," she said, reaching out to shove him in the chest. He muttered something under his breath. A flare of lightning turned the other kids on the bus into distant silhouettes. Lydia squeezed her eyes shut against the searing brightness. Thunder roared like a freight train, rattling windows and leaving her ears ringing. She had never seen a storm hit so hard, so fast. Tornadoes weren't common around here, but that didn't mean they couldn't happen, right? The hair on her arms fanned out, and a wave of pressure thrummed against her chest. The bus skidded to a stop, throwing Lydia against the edge of a seat. Its high back caught her in the stomach, leaving her gasping for breath. Screams and shouts competed with the eerie harmonics of the wailing horn, making her skin crawl. She blinked, trying to clear the after-images from the lightning strike. Her ears still buzzed. The bus was complete chaos. Kids were scrambling to get to their feet, climbing over the scattered backpacks and one another, shoving their way toward the door. It all seemed so far away. Lydia stared out the windshield, her mouth falling open as a torrent of water rushed down the street. Flashes of lightning pierced the dark sky. Pain burned like a stitch in her side, making it hard to breathe. She had to get out. She had to run. Lydia shivered, pushing her way through her panicked classmates to the front of the bus. The driver was slumped over the wheel, blood running from his forehead. Outside, a huge maple tree lay across the road. It was a miracle they hadn't hit it. "Come on," Clive said. "They're looking for you." That's how the story opens.